Welcome back, everybody, to episode 6 of the Access of Genius podcast. My name is Blake Chalfant, and I'm joined by my dear co-host, David Henry Rickenbach, DH and BC, back at it. And today we are doing part 2 of a little series we're kind of getting into. So if you're new here, I recommend going back to episode 5 and listening to that episode first, because this is really building off of all the ideas shared there, and I think it'll be much more beneficial if you start there. And on the last episode, we really built the foundation for kind of the current time and playing field that we find ourselves in with capitalism, with money and business, and really we explored a lot of what can go wrong, where people get stuck, the quote-unquote wound, and the intention for today's episode really is to build off of that, to open the doorway into what is possible, and really exploring some of these new and more beautiful ways of holding money, of running businesses that are creating a lot of goodness, both for us as individuals, but also for other people and the collective. And so I want to share a quote that I think will be a good kind of invocation for the conversation. And I'll create a little buffet, and then I'll pass it over to you. And we'll start walking on this wild path into the dense forest that we began last week. So here's the quote. Quote, "I must study politics and war, so that my sons may have liberty to study mathematics and philosophy, in order to give their children a right to study painting, poetry, and music." It comes from John Adams, and that's a rough quote. I think the exact quote has a little bit different words, but you get the essence. And I really wanted to start there. I think this is one of the most powerful quotes that I have heard, especially as it relates to some of the responsibilities of just our time. And so what comes up for me with that quote is this idea of the true adult. And so I think part of being a true adult is a deep recognition and acknowledgement of the current playing field and some of the responsibilities of participating in that. And so much of what we have talked about is how can we get to the place of business or social media where it's like it's like exciting, it just feels good. And on a whole other level, I think there is something very important and potentially deeply generative around just some of the responsibilities and calls to action that maybe don't feel like so much of a I get to, but maybe more feel like this is just the time that we live in, and this is an important thing. And so I feel that very strongly with business and with money and capitalism. And, it's like coming back to that idea, I'm going to study mathematics and business so that my children can study this, so their children can just fully be in, the most beautiful expression of the arts, the creativity and things like this. And so I do feel like if we are taking this multi-generational perspective, that our life is somehow of benefit to other people's lives, our children's, their children's lives, then there is a responsibility of using our current playing field to benefit the future playing fields. And part of the playing field is that we all need to make money, and that so much of the influence on society and the world is happening in the realm of business and corporations and things like this. And so, this idea that all of the people who maybe you don't appreciate the way that they're playing the game, or the quote unquote sharks, they're in the arena. They're having a great time in the arena. And so I feel like a big part of the call of our time is more people entering the arena, learning how to play the game, and showing a more beautiful way of playing the game. And there's a lot of people who are resisting that call and would rather not, and kind of have this fantasy of just studying poetry and the arts. And that's beautiful. And I just feel like there's this sort of deeper call to action. So anyway, I'll lob the ball back over to your side.
Yeah. Yeah, right. There's the sense of I want to study poetry and the arts and then neglecting the politics and the war. And I feel like a nice way to really frame this, to just add to the framing that you've already done, which is so beautiful, is the hero's motif. Thinking of a recent viewing of Star Wars, and the tale of Luke Skywalker is so indicative, I think, of this movement we're really trying to empower, which is, in a sense, the movement from I have to I get to. But the I have to is a really important image of the hero's journey. And in the Star Wars saga, which is just one of so many examples of the hero's archetype, the hero's motif of being kind of cast into the call of adventure, is Luke is living on his little planet and is completely unaware that there's like a galactic war brewing, and it takes his family being killed to be like, holy shit, I have to engage this thing. I have to study politics and war. There was no other choice in that moment. And we could go down the list of popular culture and different movies, different depictions of this "you have to" moment. But I do think it's an important piece to acknowledge. I could certainly track it in my own personal life. I'm sure you have your own version of this, and I'm confident every single person who would listen to this would have their own personal version of this, of having to face directly the sense of, fuck, I don't really want to, but I have to, within their
Yeah.
calling, within resistance, within meeting the world as it actually is, as opposed to how we wish it could be. So I could keep going, or I could pause here and toss it back to you.
No, keep going.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I think framing this movement from like the have to the get to, and being in the place where you love the game, you love the sport, you love your craft, and you're in this sense of day to day, like, wow, like this is an incredible blessing. I get to do this. I get to play piano, or I get to practice jujitsu, or I get to write the poetry, whatever our personal version of that is. That's a pretty incredible place if you've gone through the trials and tribulations to build a business around it, and or you have a business where it pays all the bills, that you have sufficient time to have like a legit hobby, in the sense of your passions can fill your mornings or your evenings or your weekends. And so in a way, we're emphasizing two key things. One is underutilized privilege. The many people who might listen to this who have a lot of privilege, it's just not activated and it's being squandered, wasted potential. You have the opportunity, but for some reason you're ignorant or blind to it, or the tragic nature of the beast has got you down. And so, one part, I think, is we were wanting to encode a whole bunch of medicine and unique perspectives into anyone who's listening who might have privilege to start exercising these opportunities but isn't taking them. And then on the flip side of, for those who are, cracking the code, like really building up the highest potential, the scaffolding of, well, how good can this thing get once you're kind of off to the races?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, there does seem to be this very like mythic call to action for people to play the game of business in our current time. Like this is one of, I think, like the big call to actions, especially within like the sort of spiritual medicinal community, that yeah, it's a big thing for a lot of people, and a lot of people have a lot of resistance to saying yes to that call, myself included. And I think something interesting that we could certainly talk a lot about is the immense spiritual practice that business is, and like just how potent of an access point into all of our deepest stuff it is. And for me, I think the people that I look up to the most in our time are people like yourself, or like the Godsies, who I respect on a very just human character structure, way you carry yourself level, but also your ability to navigate the business world. And for me, I admire it so much because I know that how much comes with it. And so people who are willing to go into the depths of that arena but who have also kind of found a way to do it in a really beautiful way and have found these virtuous cycles of being of benefit and also of living a thriving lifestyle that I really look up to a lot. And I know it's something that we're going to get into, like the potential of business in terms of doing something that is reinforcing the most beautiful, enriching lifestyle that you could possibly be living, that is directly influencing the way that you are adding value to other people's lives and things like this. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think fundamentally, the kind of container we're advocating for is a container that's built around what we might call like soul-led entrepreneurship or like a growth-based business. And in thinking about this time where we were going to be talking about this in the days leading up to it, it actually dawned on me for the first time. I never really looked through this lens that, my business as an entrepreneur, as a coach, guide, etc., is built around my personal growth. And there is a sort of sink swim dynamic there that I never quite identified, which is if I stop growing as an individual, that means my business stops growing. If I stop having meaningful insight or self-discovery on the healing arts path, that's going to directly influence my clients, probably quite negatively. If I'm zoning out and numbing out, then that's going to be bad for business. Whereas if I'm doing attention training and, doing meditation retreats, et cetera, that's going to be really good
Right.
for my clients. And I think in my personal path over the years, I really toggled with this sense of have to get to, because there's a lot of resistance as, we're going for audacious goals. But I think that's actually something really worth focusing on, because when we talk about capitalism, we're talking about either aligned incentives or misaligned incentives. And I know we wanted to bring in the Mark Andreessen quote, which is something to the extent of capitalism is a somewhat flawed system, but it's the best system that we know about for incentivizing strangers to take care of each other. And that's a really profound idea because it points to the way in which we can have basic trust of other people, basically just because we have pro-social cooperation. We have pro-social aligned incentives, which is, I trust that the baker isn't going to poison the bread because, he needs to keep baking every single day to, get his kids through school. And so I give him this, fake money
Right.
or quote unquote real money, and he gives me uncontaminated bread, and we have mutual incentive to be healthy. And that's just
Yeah.
like actually pretty darn incredible. Like if you really take a few steps back and like look at like the social architecture of strangers incentivized to help strangers, it's phenomenal.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think something important to note there is that I feel like one of the ways that we've seen maybe capitalism go wrong or a bad taste in some people's mouth is like corporations, businesses creating problems to solve, like just kind of endlessly creating more and more problems that never quite get solved because there's the endless loop of money. Big Pharma is maybe a perfect example of this. But on the other side of that, I think there is an infinite demand of and supply of like potentially beneficial solutions, like solutions that are actually needed and are truly solving problems. There's no shortage of that.
Yeah.
And
Go on. Yeah.
no, and I think I think that brings us to the next step, which is asking what is the unique problem that you are wanting to solve. And that opens up a whole bag of worms of maybe the process of arriving to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think, we're circling around a number of great ideas at this point, but to circle back to one that I think we just sort of tangentially veered off of, but you're just going to keep circling around is, really elucidating on the path of making money as a path of self-actualization. Your
Yes.
business is a path of self-actualization. Your service is a path of self-actualization. And there's different reasons why this is so epically important right now. And I'll just put one on the table, and I'm sure we'll generate others. But for myself, like when I first realized that this transhumanism thing was like going to happen in our lifetime, it was maybe about 10 or 15 years ago. Like, there was this futurist visionary inside of me that was like, oh, we might actually enter an era where technology threatens the complete extinction of the human experience. And we're kind of right now, 2025, 2026, kind of going through this eye of the needle right now where, the exponential tech is ramping up. And now we're left with this profound question of like, are we going to be able to emphasize what it means to be fully human? Are we going to be able to sovereignly express the fundamentals of what makes being alive as a human and what makes us thrive as humans and protect the ecology around our survivability or thrivability? Like, this is all kind of like the time in which the proving ground of, can we do this as a species is alive and active. And I know for myself that puts a huge amount of fire under me. But as we have been building the foundation through episode 5, and as we're in episode 6 now, starting to elucidate these different pathways of business as self-actualization, I just feel like it's so important to keep hammering home that like the kind of soul led or the kind of human led or the authentic based or the transformational based like economy that we're talking about kind of has to be the way of the future in regards to like giving humans incentives to transform and to grow and to
Yeah.
adapt in a time where it's actually quite threatened. It's quite in peril. So it's like
Yeah.
we're talking about making money because we all need to within capitalistic frameworks, but we're also talking about like how to do this in a way which fully brings forth everything we love and care about being a human, when if we don't, there is actually a pretty massive consequence.
Right. So beautiful, man. And I had an image when you were talking about like the way of the future, that in this new paradigm of what you're speaking to, like everyone's uplifted. It's not like the one person who's the coach or whatever, they're the only one who's rising with
Mhm.
self-improvement financially. No, like everyone's rising together on this in this new way. So I want to really ground in this idea for anyone who maybe isn't fully on the same page of this way of incentivizing your own growth through your business, that cycle that can be created. Um, so maybe you can share your experience with that, how that looks in your life, in your business, just to really ground in the idea with an example.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, these are things that I haven't really ever articulated in regards to like what makes my business a growth-based business, what makes my business a container of self-actualization. It's all just been implicit. And I would say on like a meta theme right now in my life, it's all about going from the implicit to the explicit. So just for anyone who's listening and just, to you personally, Blake, as we're kind of exploring these pathways, I just, want to keep championing like this is a totally like fascinating novel exercise of taking things that have been internal and making them external, taking
Mm-hmm.
the implicit and making it explicit. And for myself, what I can say, and something I actually feel really proud of in myself as a human being, I can't quite say where this came from. I'm sure we could wax philosophical about, the nature where these things come from in a human, but it's something that has been deeply enduring in my life, and which I'm really proud of having followed it, which is basically just a deep fundamental drive towards mastery. And from a pretty early age, most notably high school, man, I looked out into the world and I saw the role models that were available. Teachers at the high school, social icons in the public eye, etc. I wasn't impressed at all. I was really, really not impressed, actually. And, it was a kind of a long, arduous journey of calling in people into, my personal sort of assembly of masters, so to speak, into like people who I'm like, oh, I legitimately love the way they're doing life. I legitimately think that they're adding value to this human condition in a way which I find deeply aspirational. One of those first people who was a spiritual hero of sorts was Ram Dass, and the whole "Be Here Now" and his whole journey of awakening, which just hit a deep inner chord. Because I think in a pretty fundamental way. I was pretty spiritually malnourished, like a lot of kids growing up in the West. It's just kind of like secular life doesn't hit all the notes in the way that I think we deeply need in terms of our sense of spiritual nourishment. So, I know I'm kind of going back into a deeper backstory in regards to like where does this come from inside of me, this growth-based business or authenticity-based business. But I think what I'm really trying to point towards is it's all born of a deep drive towards mastery, and it's also born of a deep drive of there's got to be something better. This contrast of I'm looking out to the war and the politics of the world, and I know that I want to spend my time on art and poetry. So, how do I do this?
Yeah. Yeah. And there is something, even though that quote is talking like multi-generationally, I also feel it in terms of the different stages of our life. It's like part of the way that I'm seeing business right now is like this very upfront, high energy, high lifting now. And over time, it's sort of turning into more like regenerative systems, things like this, that's creating more time and space within my life while I have these revenue streams coming in so that I can write more poetry, so that I can do music. So I also feel like the stages of our personal life as well.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really cool fractal. I think we could even say it's the stages of a day. There's the war and politics part of the day, where if you
Yeah.
don't have your war and politics dialed, like you're not going to be able to
Yeah.
study well. And if you're not studying well, you're not going to make good art and poetry. Like
Yeah.
there's even a case to be made that business itself is a form of war.
Yeah. Well, it's like Godzi has this frame, because as he does with all humans, like we have the very human basic needs, like pay your electric bills and taxes, and then the next day you're writing like a paradigm shifting essay, just like the multifacetedness of being a human right now. And something that he talks about that allows him to navigate these different realms, and especially the realms that are not so fun, maybe like paying bills, is like these archetypes. So like the king archetype, for example, the one who's taking care of his people and things like this, like putting on that that like mythopoetic costume, like allows him to really step into that and like, okay, I'm paying the bills and things like this. And so I feel what you're talking about, like even in terms of the fractal of a day, there's this sort of adulting, kingly, taking care of what needs to be done energy, which creates the spaciousness for art and creativity. But it's like you can really rest into the spaciousness and the art and the poetry, knowing that the king showed up today, took care of business, and it doesn't have to be that black and white, obviously. But I really like that idea, and I want to.
What? Oh, go on. Yeah.
I just said I wanted to circle back again to the growth-based business idea and just give an example to really ground this in that. I remember when I was 16, working at a Mexican restaurant, and one of my jobs in the beginning was literally sweeping the floor for like 6 hours. It was awful. But, I could show up to that job completely hungover and no one would notice. No one would say, you're going to get fired because you're hungover, you're not doing a great job. It didn't matter. There was no incentive for me to like, okay, I need to get a good night's sleep. I need to wake up, do my morning practice before I go in and sweep the floor. And I also think about that with, a lot of people, like in the corporate world, for example, in these like 50,000 person business corporations. Like at the end of the day, whether or not you do your hour-long meditation practice in the morning or you got absolutely baked in the morning, people really aren't going to, I mean, to an extent, there is an end to that, but for the most part, people aren't going to really notice. It's like I can kind of mess around, I can kind of fuck off, and boss isn't going to really notice because I'm still meeting my quota, yada yada. So there's really not a strong incentive structure to be the best version of yourself that you possibly can be.
Yeah.
And for example, with the work that you do, with the work that I do, for example, if I got blackout drunk last night, or I was getting stoned today, or for example, you would so clearly be able to tell on this podcast. It would be such a clear feedback loop. I would get off this podcast and be like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, I got to clean this up. I can't do this, you know?
Totally.
Or we're seeing a client, and on some level, there is such a clear difference from when someone shows up and gives a badass session. You're like, this person's in the pocket, they're doing their thing, versus it's okay. And so it's there. It's just such clear feedback and reflection that on the one hand can be very like just a dose of reality and kind of calling you in, and on the other hand can be such a beautiful kind of positive reinforcement. Keep going, nurture nurture those seeds that you're already nurturing. Like, keep going.
Yeah. I'm so glad you're saying this because I feel like it's very easy, certainly in my own mind, to abstract, incentive structure. And, it's such a big word of like, what are these incentive structures? But like the example you just gave of like showing up and, sweeping the floor and no one's going to notice if you're baked or if you're hungover. That's such a grounded and good example of how incentive structure informs our sense of like, yeah, I don't really need to try that hard and it's not really going to matter versus, showing up and a teacher is looking directly into your eyes and evaluating, whether you deserve an A or an A minus based
Mm-hmm.
on, your articulation of someone else's idea. It's like, there's just such
Right.
these are just such vivid examples in which it's like the incentive structure is just directly correlated to our behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. And a couple other examples coming to me right now. One is, if we're on this podcast and all of a sudden I bring through this quote or this idea that I was reading in a book yesterday, and it lands really well for you and it feels really good articulating that, there's such a clear internal click for me of like reinforcing the reading that I did yesterday. It's like making me want to go do it more and more, because I'm seeing in real time the
Yeah.
benefit of that reading, of that learning. It's like, oh my gosh, now I get to bring this idea and it's so cool, and I'm building this internal library of ideas. Amazing. The
Hmm.
cycle just gets stronger and stronger. Or like, even if you're working at like an office job or something, and someone comments on like, wow, you just feel so like calm, and you're such a nourishing presence to be in at the water station during the lunch break. Or even if no one says anything and you're just going through your day and you're feeling so good, and you happen to have done this beautiful meditation practice in the morning or something. Again, just like these moments of reflection and being like, wow, that thing that I did, that seed that I nourished this morning, yesterday, 2 days ago, that I'm having the real time feedback of, this is just influencing my life and a beautiful way. Just it adds fuel to the drive to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a good example of reinforcement learning and how when we're getting positive feedback, we can bring that in and say, okay, what is happening right now is the thing I want to have happening. If I stay on the thing that I'm doing, it'll keep happening. And those are
Right.
really good virtuous cycles to identify. And one of the ties in that I feel like is just such an important meta theme on what we're cracking the code on right now as we kind of weave these threads through the episodes is, if we go back in time and look at, say, the artists of old, like let's peel back 500 years, it's like if you were an artist, really the only way you were working is if you had a commission.
Right.
The Duke said, yeah, I like your work and I'm going to commission you to paint this thing. Or, you're an architect and the king's like, yes, you can build a cathedral. And it's like, you're working essentially what we would think of today as a 9 to 5. It's like you're only able to show up and you're only able to have the resource that you need to for the project because the powers that be are saying, yes, you can do this project and you're hired. And so it's commission based, it's contract based. And one of the things that's so interesting to contrast with the artists of our current moment is that we're in a completely untethered and free space. And the being commissioned for work is, it still happens. Freelancers and commission based artists is it's still a thing. But the vast majority of contemporary artists are more making up day to day of like, what do I think is interesting? What am I inspired by? And then
Right.
these sort of existential questions of, well, what's even relevant right now? And how do I position my work so that it's relevant and people will pay attention to it and it will matter to them? And the thing that I want to tie in as this meta theme is that in our exceptional freedom, we have to create these structures for ourselves. Like the idea of a self-actualizing business might sound pretty and flashy until you like grok the level of like this is evolutionary necessity right now. Like if you're not self-actualizing in your own business, you are working for someone else, and those incentive structures may or may not be aligned. Whereas if you have the precious opportunity to align your own incentive structures, you can be on the self-discovery of the king archetype and how does the king archetype pay the bills. But if you don't want to do that work, if you don't want to have a self-actualizing growth-based business where you're discovering your inner archetypes and how they execute, then you're gonna have to take the alternative. There's some
Yeah.
interesting evolutionary pressures that I think I'm trying to point to in regards to how we talk about incentivizing our growth and transformation, which are cool, but also do have a little bit of a sink or swim dynamic that people need to contend with.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can start to get into that because I feel like you're pointing to, on the one hand, it's a beautiful thought and idea, and it sounds really pretty when we dress it up like this. But on the other hand, it's going to be one of the most challenging adventures you go on, and it requires a lot of discipline, effort, and the idea that everything that you do is going to have a certain level of suck, and this does too. But I think this is the sort of thing that the suck is worth it, is worth the adventure. Um,
Totally. Can I just add one little comment there on that?
yeah.
My piano teacher was over last week, and he was like, "Oh, we don't need to call this homework. Like, let's call it home play." And I just looked at him. I was like, "Dude, if I didn't have self-directed discipline at this point, I'd be fucked. Call it whatever."
Yeah, yeah.
It's like
Yeah, yeah.
it's
You
like
don't
we
need to
try
put
these
a
little
pillow around it.
yeah, it's like we don't need to call it home play to try to motivate me. It's like, dude, if I couldn't find motivation to do this on my own, like this would not
Yeah.
be happening. It would not be here
Yeah,
right
yeah.
now.
There's something like very generative for me when I actually get into like the grunt, like, like call it a freaking drill. Don't call it home plate, call it my drills.
Totally.
Like there's something that actually really lights me up about that.
I'm the same way, man. Don't sugarcoat it. Like this is work, baby.
Yeah. Yeah. Something that I'm thinking about and kind of stemming off this idea and really a fact actually for a lot of people's lives that the majority of our lifetime we spend at work, especially like, people working a 9 to 5. The majority of their lifetime they were at work. And
Yeah.
so I think it's such an important existential question to question the nature of our work and start to open up these kind of Pandora's box of possibilities of what could this be if this is what I'm spending the majority of my lifetime doing. Like, you probably want to do work that feels good and also, like you're saying, has flavors of these incentive structures that are also like compounding interest of growth and achieving mastery over time, hopefully in the domains that you actually are called to.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking of the Mary Oliver poem so much lately with her quintessential line, like, what are you going to do with your one wild and precious life? And just that one phrase, your one wild and precious life, it contains so much intelligence because this is our one wild and precious life. And this is not a dress rehearsal. And there is something to taking quite seriously in some moments of just like, what am I doing here? Like,
Yeah.
and to a certain extent, not enough people are honest about the basic fact that they're going to die.
Yeah.
And that's something that has been a huge part actually for me in this path of like getting on with it is contemplating death, contemplating the end, contemplating the uncertainty of what comes next. All of that's mission critical for me to have this basic sense of like, I'm going to live fully today. I'm going to do
Yeah.
the best work I can possibly do. And I think there's even a piece there that we might want to touch on, which is how to get to a place where you don't have nihilism around your death. Because a lot of people in this like 9 to 5 work culture, they do their YOLO thing where it's like, well, I clock in and I do my thing. And then on the weekends, I go party and I don't feel good on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but whatever. I'll get back out on the saddle on the weekend. It's like there's this kind of toxic cycle of kind of the YOLO of just like,
Right.
I'm trapped in this beast. I'm just going to make the best of it that I can. And
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a huge one. And I'm not going to pretend that I have a quick, easy solution in calling those people lazy. But I feel like just in short, pointing to the reality that there is a way out of that. And there are other ways of doing this whole thing, of doing business and of spending the majority of your time. There are other ways. And I actually don't understand because I've never been stuck in the corporate rabbit hole. I've never gone down that. But I can imagine it's really challenging. I can imagine it's quite a feeling of being trapped and how do I get out of this? And I need to make money and all the layers that go into not feeling like you can get out of that loop. And at
mhm,
some point, I think at the basement of empathizing with the reality of the challenge and things like this, there is a moment of now what? You know, are we gonna live the rest of our lives like this? Or are we gonna try and maybe explore that maybe there is another potential out there?
mm,
And I kind of wrote on this on my Instagram, but if you're someone who's just wanting to have fun, like I'd say the most fun game is exploring calling.
yeah, getting into it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Maybe you can double click on that for us in regards to like, what do you find fun about it? Like, how is it fun for you?
Yeah. I don't know if fun's actually the right word. I think fulfilling is a better word, or like connected. Like I often think that the real currency of life, or the real currency of whatever this cup is that somehow it seems like we all have within us, that um, we might call meaning, is what fills it up. But for me, it's like that deeper cup within us. That's the real currency of life. And it seems like there's an objective way that the cup gets filled up. But so following your calling isn't necessarily going to always feel fun, but I think that it is going to be the most challenging, confronting, and meaningful thing that you could ever do. And it's like riding the roller coaster. Um, but I think in terms of like this deeper feeling of I know I'm following the thread of what I'm here to do, and I know that I am in certain moments like just feeling so alive and like yes, I'm in the pocket. And the pocket's going to continue to deepen throughout your life, but for me, I feel like that's through the pursuit of calling, of listening to whatever that is for you and exploring that and taking the scary leaps when it asks you to take the steps, because it will ask you to take really scary steps. It's
Mhm.
like just this infinite game of exploring the growth edges you of how the essence of you is wanting to grow into something more. And from my experience, that's the most interesting, fulfilling game to play that I've ever played.
Mm. Yeah, yeah.
I have a couple tie-ins, unless you have anything to say, but that I think would be interesting to kind of to go back a moment. Actually, um,
Hmm.
I think it'd be really interesting to explore that shift for people into deciding to kind of go all in on creating a life where the business that you are in is soul led and is creating these incentive structures
Hmm.
for your own personal growth and
Hmm.
mastery. Because it's a big shift, right? We don't necessarily need to speak to the person stuck in the corporate world, but there's many other examples of like where people haven't fully made that shift in their life to that. And it seems like there's a lot that goes into that.
Mm.
And there's a lot of self-belief. There's a lot of trust. It requires a certain level of inner leadership, right? Like you're your own boss now. You're organizing your own time and your schedule and your energy, and can I do this on my own? And like it requires so much.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if you could maybe speak to that shift.
Yeah. Well, I really do believe in my heart of hearts that we're in a time of precious opportunities. And there's different ways to articulate why this is such a precious moment in time. But just as one example, if we were in the 1950s transitioning into the 1960s and we are, innovating or exploring around this unique compound called LSD, and we got it from a psychiatrist, or we got it from a psychologist, or we got it from an experimental chemist, connected to Albert Hoffman or something, our experiences would be so edgy. They'd be so edgy. We talk about them, or we integrate them, there's promise or there's peril. And ultimately, the 1960s zeitgeist resulted in this massive, what's the word I'm looking for? This massive, man, the word is not coming to my mind. There was growth and expansion that was happening in terms of consciousness, and then there was a massive contraction. Let's just go with that. There was a huge contraction around consciousness expansion. And so, where we are, say, 50, 60 years later, there is literally, for our generation, no limits to how much you can expand your consciousness or innovate in your consciousness or explore your inner consciousness if you're providing practical utility back into the economy. Which is to say that right now, I could have a quintessential spiritual experience. I could write down my quintessential spiritual experience and make an online course, and then I could make YouTube videos about it. And then if people want to pay attention to and send me money for that course or watch those videos, like, I'm good to go. It's like if I did that in the 1950s, like, yeah, if I had some, chops, I might be able to start a cult. I might be able to start a religion. But I guess what I'm trying to point to is we really do have a precious opportunity right now. Maybe I didn't use the best example, but times have changed really dramatically from where we were to where we are now. And within that, the world itself is changing very rapidly. Like, we're in a pretty chaotic time, and disruptive technologies are being rolled out in a pretty profound way right now. We really don't know what these next couple of years are going to be like, and I think most people who are involved in the industries which are changing the world are pretty honest to admit that at this point. We don't know what's going to happen in these coming years. And so I think it's fair to say that it's more valid than ever to follow your intuition and to be soul led. I used a kind of crass example of, LSD and spiritual evolution, but that's just one of many places where what was once taboo is no longer taboo. If you can build a real business around what you're into, the sky's the limit. There's no one that's going to stop you.
Right. Yeah. What's coming up for me is the idea that the kind of big paradigm shifting technological advancements in the history of humanity, like language, like the printing press, one other, but now with the internet, all of them, what they share is that they have sped up the speed of communication and the reach for mass communication, pretty much. And it makes me feel like almost like the wind of our time is just the strongest it's ever been. And so if our businesses or what we're doing, it's like a ship with sails. The wind of our time now is the strongest, the fastest it's ever been. And so for people who have created their business around, you know, in a soul led way, where the incentive structures are there, the kind of virtuous cycles are put in place, like it is just exponential increase of goodness. The wind is stronger than it ever is, and it's just this this image of like skyrocketing of the in the idea of compounding interest. And so over time, like the incentive structures working off of each other, so your own personal growth that you're doing in your own life, the value you're giving to your clients, the value your clients are giving to you in exchange, over time it just continually exponentially increases. And so I just feel like what you're speaking to and kind of the call of our time and the precious opportunity is like, build the boat, get the scaffolding in place, because the ripeness of our time, the speed of the wind, the potential of possibility is just so ripe. And I think it's just a matter of time and iteration and of developing skills to where you enter into that stream of the infinite upward spirals of virtuosity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think that that's the lightning bolt. It really is summed up in build a boat right now. And I think the image that you're painting is really accurate in the sense of, if you see the landscape as it is, and you see the way that the dramatic changes are happening in the landscape, you really have some options. You can
Yeah.
build your boat and catch the sails. You can try to get on someone else's boat. There's metaphorical Titanics right now, and there's metaphorical, incredible opportunities in regards
Yeah.
to boat designs. And I think in a fundamental way, we're over here saying, like, there's ways of building the boat right now which are like the coolest that they could possibly be. Like, don't miss it.
Right. Yeah, yeah. I want to shift lanes a little bit and throw you some alley oops, but yeah, in terms of the different ways of building a boat, actually, I'll hit on something and then I'll get to that. One thing that I experience a lot when talking to people about this sort of stuff, building these kinds of businesses, or even, the preciousness of the opportunity in this whole realm of podcasting and social and growing a personal brand and online communities, there is just opportunities in our current playing field that were not around 10 years ago, like exponentially different. And but when I talk to people about this thing, for so many people, it's not even in their realm of possibility. They're not even thinking about these new business adventures as a potential for them, because I do think that they all require a certain level of self-belief, a belief that other people will resonate with me, the way that I do things, the way that I speak to things, my curiosities, my interests. There's this fundamental question of why me? I'm not like one of them. I'm not like the others. So I'll like settle for this job where I can kind of follow along. I'm kind of following someone else's dreams, because why me? Why would I be that? And so I just wanted to name that. And ultimately, I think that is just a belief. And I think every single person has the potential. I think every single person is called to being a leader in some specific culture or domain. And that there are people, we've said this probably every episode, that will uniquely resonate with your message. And I think it's just an objective truth that at some point there's a moment of daring to believe that maybe you have something. Maybe you have something to say. Maybe you have a unique part of the puzzle to offer that other people are really going to resonate with.
Yeah. Well, I think part of that equation is the way in which creativity or imagination itself can be something of a scarce resource. And it brings me back to a phrase that I haven't thought of in some time, but the phrase is from Rob Resney, and he would talk about the genocide of the imagination. And we talk sometimes about like the various kinds of genocides that have happened to people and places and times, and there's a whole like sort of mass trauma side of things in terms of like what's gotten us here, and that's dark and cryptic and not necessarily what we're talking about today. and it's a part of, the general overarching context that we find ourselves in. But specifically in terms of the genocide of the imagination, that has a really interesting nuance because it ties in quite deeply with daring to believe. Like one of my favorite phrases from Dan Brown is, if you can imagine something, then you can literally create new possibilities, new possibilities for reality. I mean, he kind of said it a little bit more succinctly. It's something to the effect of, when you imagine something, you're creating the possibility for that reality. And that's
Mm,
actually like really profound. Like if you
yeah.
really just sit with that basic idea that if I imagine something, I'm creating the possibility for that reality. I mean, that
Mm-hmm.
actually points to an agency, it points to a creative volition, it points to the malleability of reality. And
Right.
actually, the malleability of reality is another piece that I think we wanted to touch on with the Steve Jobs quote in regards
Right.
to recognizing that the world was built by people just like you and me. The world is changing and it's malleable, and you and I or anyone can play a role in shaping it. That's a huge
Right.
piece. But just the tangle with self belief and imagination is so key because, and this is another area where I think the healing arts sort of therapeutic mindset is such a key in these times. It's like many people don't have the experience of doubling down on giving themselves qualitative attention to unlock their personal process of discovering their inner world, discovering their inner feeling, discovering their inner
Stories.
beliefs, their inner stories, and even like probably we could probably say with some confidence that many people don't have a regular access to their deep imagination. They don't even really utilize
Mm,
what's available to them in terms of the capacity to imagine. And I'll tie one more thing in and then pass it back to you, which that's an area where someone like Godzi really honing in on dreams is so interesting. I can so appreciate like his mythopoetic soul that's kind of like looking at the zeitgeist and being like, whoa, like we don't talk about our dreams.
yeah.
We're all having these dreams every single night that are profoundly influential to our emotions and our psychologies, but like in our modern day world, like the toxic flatland of our world, like nobody talks about them. We don't ask
Yeah.
each other about them. It's like they're not in the forefront of our minds. Like from a certain level, it's like how is that not clearly like showing that we're in some kind of insanity? Like the
Right.
most deep thing that's happening in our interior, we don't even talk about with each other. It's bonkers in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Yeah, what comes up for me with this one is, I think a really succinct goal that maybe I think all humans should be aspiring for is um, how vast we can expand the horizons of our imagination. Like, and then how the stories that we have can either help expand the horizon of our imagination, help expand the horizon of what's possible, or vastly limit it. And I'm experiencing this in such real time right now because I have a cousin who's applying for jobs right now out of college, and he's very much still in the corporate ladder going in to get the jobs. And it's wild to talk to him about this because there's so many stories that are just completely limiting his realm of possibility. They are they are influencing what he's even thinking about for himself. So it's like, I'm just going to try and get one of these, jobs at the bottom of the food chain because this is what I have to get. He's already planning on living at home with his parents because he feels like he has to, quote unquote, instead of dreaming into living in his favorite place with the perfect apartment and stuff. And so I also think that, what you're speaking to in imagination is going to reveal the stories that you have so clearly because you're going to see the kinds of realities that your imagination won't even allow you to go to.
Yeah.
And then it just
Yeah.
becomes this game of like widening the scope of the horizon through the
Yeah.
stories.
Yeah. Well, it is this vibe of dare to dream, dare to believe. I know for myself, when I imagine new possibilities, I start getting energized. And then as I get energized and I feel the way that like, oh, I have agency, I can execute on this idea if I do this and if I do that, blah, 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 then it's like, oh, I'll actually live that. And then there's been moments where as I've like gotten into the momentum of pursuing the dream, there's another part of me is like, fuck, like why do I have to have these audacious dreams? Like,
I
dude,
know.
this is fucking hard.
Yeah, yeah.
You're just like, come on. Like, and I feel like that's worth mentioning there because it's like, on the one hand, I
Yeah.
know we want to be the regenerative force here and say, like, yes, dare to believe. It's so worth it. It's so fulfilling. There's so much fun. There's all this amazing stuff that moves with having the audaciousness to dream big.
Mm-hmm.
And it's worth even saying, and the energy of dreaming big, the
Yeah.
energy of feeling the possibility, and the energy of saying, oh,
Yeah.
I can get this. Like, that is truly vital. I mean, that's the magnetic vital force that's moved my life along for sure.
Yeah.
And then I think the other side of that, which is, important to elucidate, which is like, and it will be scary as fuck.
It
And
comes
there'll
with
be
a suck.
moments. What?
It comes with a level of suck.
Yeah, and it comes with a level of suck. And what the fuck did I get myself
Yeah.
into? And like, why couldn't I just play small? It would be so much easier.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's so much here, man. What comes to mind is the the mythopoetic moment of the leap, which we've talked so much about. Like you being in this new house, for example, was a massive leap. It forced you to up level financially, all of these things, and I can imagine that that was maybe there was some moments within that of fuck, why did I dream so big? And this is really hard and this really sucks. And, I think part of the nature of what we're talking about, these soul led businesses that are incentivizing growth and things like this, is there are going to be, and I think this is just a nature of living in alignment with calling and daring to continually do the dance with your potential, is that there are going to be these moments where you are asked to take a big leap that scares the shit out of you. Maybe a change in your business, a lifestyle, something like this. And I think about it almost like an invasive species coming into your ecosystem. The ecosystem, which is the web of all the different relationships in your life, the relationship to yourself, the relationship to your level of self-belief, the relationship to your finances, the relationship to other people. So this invasive species comes in, which is like the leap that forces everything in the ecosystem to evolve and change. And sometimes it feels like a forest fire. But like the central node of that ecosystem is your current identity, is like your ego. And so when I hear like this, I feel like these moments of suck, and I experience it a lot as like overwhelm and this core feeling of like, I can't do this, or I don't believe in myself. And I had this really profound insight a couple months ago when I was going through this after my leap moving to Costa Rica, which was like, that's actually true. The version of me that does not believe that I can do this, that is overwhelmed, can't do this. And that's the point, because there's a new version of me coming through this leap. So the version of me saying, I can't do this, I'm overwhelmed, it's like, yeah, that's true. You can't do it. Someone else is going to have to do it. And that's the point of this like alchemical moment, is that it's giving rise to whatever this next iteration of you is that can handle the new ecosystem, that can handle the new playing field.
Yeah. Dude, that's really deep. I think that kind of alchemical purification, that alchemical shifting is a real key. And it's an aspect of parts work and working with parts, and it's an aspect of self psychology and allowing the natural healing process. And this is actually an area where I've also just felt like the Dharma and like, the deep Dzogchen Mahamudra stuff is just so profound because it's like if you let yourself chill in the fundamental nature of who you really are, which is just pure awareness, identity shifts just happen. And that's bonkers to witness. It's like the most strange Jedi trick ever. I experience it as like a strange and wonderful Jedi mind trick where it's like you're telling me the part of myself that's suffering, that's trapped, that's agitated, that's all the blah, it's overwhelmed, I can't do it. You're telling me I can recognize the nature of that as being completely empty and it will like a mirage, and then the part of me that has agency, competency, willingness, clear desire, wants to be a benefit is the one that'll arise. It's like that's mind blowing.
Yeah.
And it's like I don't like talk about this too much too openly because at a certain point I feel like an evangelist or something for Buddhism or something. But it's like the psychotech of that discovery and the clarity of that discovering is has such mind blowing implications. So I guess I'm going to that Buddhist space because it's something that's been a huge piece of a similar alchemical process that you're discovering, or you just
Yeah.
shared rather in your discovery process, which is like how as we're on these journeys, as we've taken these leaps, as we've discovered that we are all in, and we're discovering the parts of ourselves that are limited or constrained or contracted, it's like how to work with those pieces in a way that's allowing genuine insight or genuine healing to occur.
Yeah. Yeah, man, I think we should do a whole episode on what you're speaking to at a later point, but just to like maybe ground this a bit more, the fundamental point of what you're saying, and I think it's a really important tie-in with the idea of like the infinite cycles of growth and of the leaps and of the forest fires that are burning everything down, is that at some point it like it requires that we connect to whatever this fundamental stable aspect of reality is, which you would call awakened awareness. But like all these different traditions point to that, different ways of getting there, but whatever this fundamental stable awareness is. And I just think it's such an important integration for people, for humans, especially humans like you and I who are constantly refining, growing, changing. It's like they want to go together. And I think they reinforce each other so beautifully.
Mm.
And it feels like a fundamental part of being human.
Hmm. Yeah, it's one of the areas as humans where we have the keys to the kingdom. And if we're aware of it, we can get some major cheat codes into unlocking our full potential and flourishing. And if we're ignorant of it, we suffer the consequence of that.
Yeah.
And, we could probably say with some confidence that this whole podcast is a huge exercise in building the confidence of exercising the keys to the kingdom to the fullest power.
Yeah. Yeah. So something that's been lingering in my head for like 20 minutes that I've been waiting for a moment, but I'm going to throw it in now, that I see a lot for people as a point of tension and resistance to stepping into the kind of business ventures that we are pointing to, is the idea that you have to be a complete master in your craft to speak to it, to help other people with it, or to do something with it. And on one hand, depending on the nature of your work, that is true. But I think what people resist, and I think such an opportunity that the shimmer, the digital world has opened, is like open sourcing your process of learning and exploring your own curiosities and exploring your own path of mastery within those crafts. So there's this whole other portion of content creation and the creator economy of people who literally just have communities or are inviting people into their own journey of learning. And it's this combination of exploring curiosity and learning, and also sometimes being a step or two ahead of some of the other people. Like you don't need to be 50 steps ahead, but there's a point where, okay, I can sort of speak to this now. But people who just want, so many people who just want to be within, your ecosystem, within your culture. They like your vibe and they want to be in this shared collaborative journey of learning, of exploring curiosity, of developing mastery alongside each other. But again, I think a lot of people really resist that because it requires more authenticity around the trying, that I am in the moment of trying, being able to say, I haven't achieved mastery. I haven't been doing this for 30 years. I haven't, quote unquote, figured it out. I'm figuring it out, and I want to invite you all into that. And I think there's so much potential for a lot of thriving there, that often people don't recognize.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I'm just pulling up one of the quotes that we were riffing on here. I think it's from, yeah, Seth Godin. He said, art is what we call it when what we do might not work. If you know it's going to work, it's not art, it's industrialism. The connection economy rewards the artist, not the cog.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's from Seth Godin. And I think it's speaking to a facet of what you're pointing to, which is the connection economy, the authenticity based economy, the being willing to learn out loud, to be seen as you're learning, to be seen in vulnerabilities. And for me, it brings back one of the essential ingredients of this time, which is emphasizing the human primacy of experience itself. You know, nobody wants to read a book written by an AI right now. Like that's a general feeling is, yeah, the AI can make a nearly perfect novel, but who wants to read that? Like
Yeah.
nobody wants to read that. Whereas
Yeah.
if I get a deep inner view into who you are on your journey as a human being and the stories that you've gone through and the trials and tribulations and how you've overcome them, and it's like, and Blake writes a novel, it's like interested.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a like fundamental resistance to be seen in our imperfection.
Yeah. Truly, truly. I mean, I've already gotten like self-conscious about things I've said in this episode that seem a bit imperfect to me, and I'm like, I'm terrified, or
Yeah,
not
yeah.
terrified, but it's uncomfortable.
Yeah. So, I feel like a core part of what we are saying is listen to and attune to the solution that you feel called to bringing and expressing, attuning to your sense of calling, and from there, accepting the call of our times to learn the art of business and getting on the playing field. And from there, refining, iterating, continuing to nurture the sense of calling and the solutions, and really building the scaffolding so you can enter into that infinite game of the incentive structures, creating the beautiful virtuous cycles of growth and value. That's like maybe a really rough blueprint of what we're speaking to. And so if we're looking at it in that way, the foundation, like the soil system or the seed, however you want to look at it, is the sense of calling, is the solution that you feel called to bringing, is the way that you want to help strangers, or just to use that quote. And that's such an important piece. And I think something I've been thinking a lot about this week is people throw around the word calling, dharma, purpose. I tend to like the word calling, I've realized. Um, but I don't see many people practically breaking that down. I think Godsey does this beautifully, but I think there needs more of that, because my intuition is that there's a very, when a word like that is thrown out, there is a very black and white divide that's created. There are the people who intimately experience those words, who know what calling is, and they live it every day. And then there is people who have never really touched that at all, or they don't know what it is and they don't recognize it, and they just kind of look at people who are examples of people in their calling or something as like one of them. And there's very little room in between the two. And I feel there is an immense need for more people speaking to like practical ways of actually bridging the gap. And so it feels like a really important piece that we unpack, because that this is the foundational layer of, I think, the kind of businesses that we are speaking to. And so I'd be remiss if we didn't touch on this at all. Um, and so I thought it would be interesting, and I'm generally curious to hear from you. Like, when you have a client coming to you who they don't know what their calling is, or they have a big question mark around this solution or something like this. How do you think about that? And I guess, like, what are your sorts of operating systems frames, in how you hold someone like that? Because I think I would assume that one of your desires is to get people into that pocket where they're living from that place. So how do you think about this? Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Well, yes, the work is always to get someone into their own personal pocket of their calling, or as I've been waxing on more poetically recently, their personal ecology of genius. And just as an overarching kind of map here, I think of my work as something of like a visionary cartography, in the sense of I'm working with someone deeply on an individual level to understand their inner maps, how they make sense of their reality, and then make a new map, essentially, that is their healing journey, that is their growth journey, that gets them into their ecology of genius. And so that's the basic A to B sort of meta map, if you will. But when it comes to like the actual nuances of discovering, how to really be present to someone's calling, the key word is listening. It's all about listening. And my job as a professional, and I would wager the major deficit for a lot of people who are dancing between the black and the white, as you're describing, really does hinge on qualitative listening. And the thing about listening is that it goes through these different gradations. And we could use a model like, say, gross body, subtle body, casual body, causal, rather. And as a kind of a simple map of like 3 octaves, gross being, or crass being, like that's, when we're in the density, there's all these different sounds, we have all these different distractions, there's all these different things vying for our attention. Generally speaking, when you tell someone who's in that layer of experience, listen for your calling, it's like, what the hell are you talking about? It's like, is that my calling? Is that my calling? Is that my calling? It's like everything could be your calling, or, it's like, there's all sorts of noise, essentially. I mean, it's a classic noise signal kind of equation we're talking about now. And so whether it's a one-on-one session, or whether it's helping someone philosophically understand it in a podcast like this, it's this movement from that denser into the more subtle. Josh Waitzkin has this beautiful phrase of helping someone listen to their inner music. Typically we're not trained to pay close attention to our inner harmonies, our inner music. We're trained to externalize and be very reactive to what's happening in external stimulus. We completely lose touch with our inner music. And then it's layer by layer digesting all the different noises into paying attention very, very closely, very, very intimately, very subtly to what feels like a calling. And then there's another image here, which is nice, which is like the radio dial. And you could think of your individual calling like this beautifully subtle crystalline signal. And when you hone in on it, when you tap into it internally or in conversation, it's unmistakable. It's vital life force. It's clarified information. It's the most familiar thing to us. And yet, until we hone in on it, until we have it clearly pointed out to us, or we've pointed it out to ourselves, it's very, very, very elusive. But then the radio dial aspect of it is, once we're honed in on what that particular signal in, we can amplify it, and then we can make it super loud. The radio dial takes that radio signal and amplifies it. And so that's the general process, but it all hinges on qualitative listening and being able to stay on the thread of that lucidly.
So beautiful, man. It brings to mind the image of the mother culture again, when you talk about collecting these sounds and then we can amplify it. It's like collecting these different parts of our own internal mother culture, and then from there we sort of have the base that we can build off of and expand the sounds of. And what comes to mind also is like discovering your taste, discovering your style, paying attention when you're reading a book to the lines that stand out to you. And then over time, all of these different inputs from our environment, from our experience, like forming the sound, like the bass sound that we can start to amplify. Um, and something I want to mention is like, again, daring to believe. Because for some people, they would say, well, why would I listen? There's nothing there. There's nothing on the other side of me listening, and so just like daring to believe that maybe there is something there. Maybe it is through the threads of what uniquely lights me up, uniquely lands for me, but just like daring to believe that maybe there is something on the other side of that bridge. Maybe there is a there that's worth attuning to, that's worth like exploring and exploring the potential of the bass sound, the original sound of my music, you know? Like imagining the symphony that comes from this bass culture of the initial sounds, but just
Mm-hmm.
imagining that there is a there that's worth listening for.
Yeah, truly, truly. I have this image of trying to walk through the dark in an ayahuasca ceremony where, like, for anyone who's listening who hasn't had this experience, it's a fascinating image. If you're like in a pitch black space and you know that you need to get to the bathroom or you need to get outside, and like the whole visionary field is just like fluidly, enigmatically presenting various displays of let's call it spiritual or energetic phenomenology. You're kind of
Mm.
groping your way through the dark, but the dark is filled with illusions, so to speak. And I think that that's an apt image of what often we need to go through in regards to trusting that there's a there on our calling, which is, we might be just sitting in a chair, deliberating whether we're going to pick up our phone or pick up our journal. But in a way, in an internal psyche, we're kind of groping through the dark of all these different psychic images and energetic impressions and trusting, like, well, am I going to find any satisfaction here in the journal? Or, that phone
Yeah.
is going to give me an instant hit of something that's familiar, whether or not I like it. And yet, these these movements through the dark are constantly happening, and the dream is quite enigmatic as we're trying to move to these subtle influences.
Yeah. 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 This feels like such an important place to be in and a really nourishing pocket to explore. And something that I've been just sitting with, and I kind of wrote about this in my last newsletter, but it feels applicable here as well, in that there is going to be people listening to this, or people that I could share this idea with, who really haven't built that habit of listening in the way that we're speaking to, who would listen to this and be like, cool idea, but then they wouldn't start doing it again. And so it really brings up this question for me of like, what's it gonna take? Like, what's it gonna take for you to finally be like, fuck it, I'm going for it. I'm going
Mm-hmm.
all in on listening to the music, to my music. And I think it's hard for some people to imagine what is on the other side of following those threads. And there seems to be this compounding interest effect, as with kind of everything. But like through the listening, you're starting to pick up on these different inputs. And as you're listening, and as you have the moments of recognizing the thing, the style, the taste, it like builds on itself. So now the capacity to listen becomes even stronger. But then over time, there's this compounding interest, and then and then before you know it, your whole life has changed. Your whole
Mm-hmm.
life has changed just through starting to listen, not even just through listening to your inner music. Because at some point, following those threads, building the mother culture, like at some point, it's going to ask you to start doing things. It's gonna turn in from this purely recognizing the inputs into the desire to be in output and express. Like at a certain point, the mother culture gets so big that there's actually fruit for expression and output.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think this might be a good place for us to close shop for today. I think I'm getting ready close to a, mental timeout to recollect
Great.
myself. But I love your question actually of, what's it going to take? And I think that that's a really powerful, really meaningful question. I certainly feel like I could spend a little bit more time thinking and reflecting on that. But really, for anyone listening, of just like, it's like, who's really even asked themselves that question? Like, how often do we really ask other people that question of like, what's it gonna take, to fully come alive in this? And from a
Yeah.
place that's really curious, compassionately curious, like
Yeah. Yeah.
to let the resources be dreamed into of like, what would it really take? Like there's a lot of beauty in that question.
Right. And it that question and idea points to so much more, points to, I mean, it's embedded in the belief that there is some other force, intelligence orchestrating something in this life. And like it really hits on a lot of pieces. And again, it's all this is really alive for me because I'm very connected to the world of young men going from college to corporate America, and many of them who know that that's not necessarily what they want to do. But then when we get into the conversation and then they ask, well, what else is there? How do I transition from this into this beautiful business idea that you're speaking to? And I think this is cliche, but like we're waiting for the other pathway to show up externally. Like this is the track that I'm on. I know that's not the track that I want to be on. So I'm gonna go apply for all these other jobs, and magically this other venture is going to show up. Versus what we're speaking to is entirely an approach of listening. It's like listening to the music and letting that, as we start to draw in and get clear on what that inner music is, that'll start, like the kind of external potentials, pathways will start to become clear. And I think it's just completely counterintuitive from what we've been taught within our culture. So, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, listen to it, trust the creation, own it, iterate as you go.
yeah. All right, man. Well, we did it. Part two. Anyone who's still here, you're the best. Thank you so
Mm-hmm.
much. Appreciate you. You gonna do the smash the like button?
Uh, now I'm gonna let it go.
Well, if you are here, we would love support for the show. So if you want to subscribe and share it to a friend if it was meaningful, that is greatly appreciated.
Yeah, we'd love that.
Yeah. All right, man. Until next time.
Till next time. Great work, man.